Next up. What the f going on? There's a crank in there somewhere. Big canal perch. Awesome. Thanks for choosing to watch the video. You might be starting to think about perch fishing again. I certainly am. I can't believe it's that time of year again. I thought what I would do is just share a few sessions that I had at the end of last season, just to get the juices flowing. I was using crankbaits, so we'll be looking at those very closely. When to use them, how to fish them, sizes, colours, that kind of thing. Soft plastics in the form of shads and creature baits are fantastic. But in the right situation, I do believe that it's very hard to beat a crankbait. I used them right the way through last winter, and I used them on the canal, but they were also great on the river. So a few days away with the folks, and the conditions are absolutely banging. They've been amazing, you know, some lovely fish being caught while I've been away, so fair play to you guys that have been catching those perch. It's inspired me to get out this morning. I've got the crankbaits with me because it's got mild. It's about 9 or 10 degrees this morning at first light. So I'm going to get out on the river, hit it with crankbaits. Hopefully, I too will get amongst some of these stunning perch. Crankbait a blast before I move out to swim. Give it a little blast about. Yes. Look at that. Wallops it. Next up. What the f going on? Look at that. There's another one with it as well. Don't know what's going on with my net there. I couldn't get it off my back. Couldn't get it off my back. Little crankbait. Woo! A few days away with the wife. Down on the coast, I've got back straight on the river and look at him. What a cracking perch. Really pleased with that. On a crankbait, 2 of these chased it in fact. This one nailed it. How about that? I am well pleased with that. One on the crankbait. I thought that might happen. You know, it is quite mild, and I thought if I zipped a little crankbait around that I might get a fish, and I did. You might have noticed. I had a torrid time trying to get the net off my back. It got tangled up in my tripod that's also on my back, and they got tangled together, and I just couldn't release it. I had the perch right in front of me, just on one set of trebles like that in the water, and I just couldn't get my net off, but gave it a bloody good yank and managed to get the net off my back and net the fish. But yeah, well pleased with that, because I have been concentrating on a few other species, as you know, a bit of roach and pike. So to get back out on the river and get those perch, just, yeah, lights your fire for them. They are special, aren't they? So we are going to talk about when to use a crankbait and how we might retrieve these lures, but for now let's have a closer look at the crankbait and we'll talk about colours and sizes. So there we go, there's a fairly typical crankbait, in fact one of my favourites. In terms of what is a crankbait, what does it do? You can get floating, sinking and suspending crankbaits, and actually they're quite an aggressive lure. If you're power fishing, you might use a crankbait. They send out a lot of vibration in the water. They've got a really sort of like tight wobble to them. This one's got a rattle in it. So yeah, a lot of people will power fish with these. Or they certainly will put them on when they want to use a lure that is very, very difficult to ignore. Certainly when I've done Perch Masters, what sticks out in my mind is Ash mentioning bouncing these off structure. So he wasn't very keen on using them in sort of like silty or weedy conditions, which I kind of agree with. These trebles constantly getting hooked up on weed, but he really liked to use them on a rocky bottom or bounce them off of snags and stuff like that, to create an awful lot of noise. Tom also in one of my Perch Masters spoke about using these to activate the shoal, to actually wake them up, to actually sort of get them moving, even if then you end up using a different type of lure to catch the perch that you're after. A lot of people think that they're for sort of mild conditions, so like the autumn, and as we're coming out of the season into the end of the river season and into spring, if you then go onto the canals, I think there's an element of truth on that, but I certainly last year experimented with these and used them right through the winter, and I was catching fish on them right through. It's true that they did slow down a bit, didn't get as many when you got into the really cold days, and you probably were better off with soft plastics and Ned rigs and stuff like that, but they certainly did catch fish right the way through the winter. Let's initially talk about colour. Obviously they come in a whole range of different colours. You've heard me speak about Rattlin Hornets. I'm very, very keen on the Salmo Rattlin Hornets, been using them for years. I've done other videos on those. In terms of colours, if you've watched any of my videos, I love the chartreuse. I also really like the hot perch, and I also like the pearl shad as well. Those have all been very, very good colours for me, but there's a whole range of colours you can choose from. Some people like to use bright when the water's coloured, and go for more natural colours when the water is clear. But to be honest with me, I'll just tend to mix it up on the day and just see what they want on that given session. Of course, crankbaits come in a range of different sizes. What I found for me, ultimately, a good starting size, I would say, is like 4.5 centimetres. I think that's a really good starting point. Certainly, you can go an awful lot larger if you're fishing large lakes or on the reservoirs. Really, really big cranks can work well there. But generally speaking, 4.5 feels about right for me. So with these crankbaits, obviously you've got some that are floating, you've got some that are suspending, and you've got some that are sinking. The fish in this video are nearly all caught on a floating crankbait that's sort of like 4.5 centimetres in size. And I do use the floating ones quite a lot. You might want to consider trying the suspending crankbaits, particularly when the fish aren't quite as active and you're wanting to put pauses in a suspending crankbait. That's quite cool because they'll just sit motionless in mid-water. Although, of course, you can put pauses in on a floating crankbait as well. You can crank them in, dig them into the bottom, then pause, and the floating ones will just rise up a bit and then just repeat that. Don't tend to use the sinking crankbaits as much as maybe I should. I can see them being a real advantage when you're fishing undercover on the far bank and you're actually wanting that lure to get sort of like down in the water underneath that far bank feature. But yeah, don't tend to use those maybe as much as I should. In that scenario on the far bank there, I'm probably more likely to use a soft plastic. So this is a floating crank that I've got on at the moment. It will land on the surface. First few cranks in just to get it down to its maximum depth, and then usually it's just a steady retrieve. What I do on the river is that I will cast them diagonally to the bank. I don't tend to cast them straight out in front of me. That's mainly because these floating cranks, they take a certain amount of time to get down to that optimum depth. And of course, if you're casting diagonally, they're actually at that optimum depth for longer during that retrieve, if that makes sense, as opposed to if you just cast straight out in front. So cranks, yes, I think they're great. They've become a significant part of how I fish with lures. I think they're great as a search bait for covering lots and lots of water. You can fish them at a reasonable pace, which means you can cover a lot of river. And also it has been suggested that they're a great option if you're fishing outside of the perch's natural feeding times. So, you know, if you've built a picture of them feeding, for example, at dawn and dusk or other set periods in the day, if you want to go fishing and you know you're outside of that feeding spell, maybe put on a crank, because they don't need to be feeding to hit these. They're hitting them out of aggression and they're great for a reaction strike. But now at least 2 soft plastics had definitely passed over the head of this fish before it smashed a crankbait. Today is first mild day in ages, and so I had to get out with the cranks on the canal and check him out. Cracking fish, nailed it at my feet. Very, very pleased with him. These crankbaits, they will dive to various depths. Some will go to 2 meters, some will go up to 8 meters and deeper, you know. But yeah, certainly on the rivers and canals, I find these Salmo Hornets that are about 4.5 floating, they will actually dive down to around about 1.5 meters, 2 meters, I find, which is a great depth I've found on a fairly average stretch canal and also on my local stretches of river. Just on a bit of a side note, and I only just thought of this, and I don't want to teach you to suck eggs, you probably know this. If you've got crankbaits or hard baits in your box and you've lost the packaging and you're not actually sure how deep they dive, then just take a look at the size of the bills. You probably know this anyway, but you know, if it's got a little short, shallow bill, then you know that that's probably not going to dive as deep as, say, this one. It's got a much longer bill. And yeah, that basically is what governs how deep they dive. So if you've lost your packaging, you're not sure, the ones with the big bills will go deep, the ones with the little bills will go shallow. In terms of the other bits of kit that I use, I like to use a rod that's a little bit stiffer, so not like a super finesse rod. I like to use my all-rounder for this, my all-round jig rod. That's about sort of like 14 grams, and I feel that extra stiffness in the tip helps me work these lures a little bit better. I use a fairly moderate braid, you know, 10 to 12 pound braid, and I will use a fluorocarbon leader that's like about 4 or 5 foot long, and that will be about 10 pound breaking strain depending on the situation. And I think what is important whenever you're using crankbaits or really aggressive lures like this, you must use a trace if there are pike present, because they absolutely jump on them. We'll go into how to make up a trace now. Here's the stuff that I'm currently using to make up my light traces. Now, you do want a light trace. I think where some people go wrong is they'll go into their tackle shop and they'll go and buy a big fat meaty trace that's designed to catch pike on, and it's like cable. Drop down in breaking strain with your wire. This is 6.6 pound breaking strain, the other is about 11 I think, so it's nice and fine. What's nice about this particular material is that it's got a very fine layer of nylon over the top of the wire, and that makes it knottable. Now, I've used other knottable wires in the past and not really got on with them, but this stuff is really, really decent. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take about a foot of the wire off the spool, maybe a bit more than that, and all I do in one end is do a figure of 8 loop knot, and I just attach my main line to this loop knot. Some people might say, yeah, I'd rather use a swivel. By all means, put a small swivel on it if you want. I actually stopped doing that. I stopped putting a swivel on it purely because sometimes I want to use this trace on a floating lure. I'm using quite a lot of surface lures at the moment and suspending lures as well, and I don't want a swivel on the trace that's potentially creating a bow in that line and making it sink. So just for versatility now, all I'm attaching the main line to is a figure of 8 loop knot. And then it couldn't be much more straightforward, because down the other end I do another figure of 8 loop knot, but this time I do attach a clip to it. So I'll just pass the wire through the clip, and then yeah, with the clip on the wire, I'll do the figure of 8 loop knot. Now, I know people will be screaming at me, telling me to use a perfection loop knot. By all means, use that as well. For ease and demonstration purposes, I'm going to do a figure of 8 loop knot because you know, everyone knows how to tie one of those, don't they? And to be fair, it does me absolutely fine. So there we are, there we have it. There's my really fine trace. It's literally taken me a few minutes to knock it together. Like I say, figure of 8 loop knot up that end, down to a figure of 8 loop knot that's holding a clip at the other. The only other things I would say you need is obviously all of your usual fish care equipment. I would say step things up where you're using trebles. Make sure you haven't just got the little light forceps. Have some proper pliers and some wire cutters, you know. So make sure you step up your fish care slightly and use a rubber net. Getting treble hooks out of anything other than a rubber mesh is a complete nightmare. So yeah, make sure you use a rubber landing net. So let's have a quick chat about when to get the best out of crankbaits. I do think that they will work in surprisingly cold conditions. I know a lot of people think of them as a mild sort of conditions type lure, you know, when the fish are active and they're chasing and they're aggressive. But I would say, you know, even when it's cold, definitely stick one on if nothing's happening. You might be surprised. No. What the hell? Something has nailed. And that's a foul hook brain. Oh, happy days. Thought it moved quick. Everyone loves a foul hook brain, don't they? I mean, for God's sake. Okay. Wow. Good work. Oh my God, have I found a new spot? Oh shit. Found a new spot. Unreal. F***. I've only been fishing here 5 minutes. Look at this. I mean, look, there's a crank in there somewhere. And this is a unit. Look, a big canal perch on the crank. Look, it's disappeared. And here we are, brand new location this. Never fished it before. And look at that. Proud as punch is, look. That is the power of the cranks as a search bait. Never fished along it, ever. And look what it's produced within 5 or 10 minutes of fishing. Awesome. And there we go, look. What a beast. Go on. Away you go. Thanks for choosing to watch the video. If you did enjoy it, then please do like and subscribe and all that stuff. There'll certainly be plenty more perch fishing videos coming. I've done other videos on crankbaits and how to fish crankbaits and jerkbaits. If you're interested in jerkbaits as well, then I'll put a link on screen here to another video that you might want to check out that talks about cranks and jerkbaits as well. But that's me done for another one. Whatever it is you're fishing for, whether it's perch or anything else, enjoy your fishing, good luck, and I will see you in the next one.